All right, everybody, we are live for our next Game Dev Roundtable. Oop, someone has the volume on. But welcome everybody to the latest Game Dev Roundtable here on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games. Ramin is still out and about traveling. I believe Jack may be returning to join us in a month or so with school finally letting out. But we have our roundtable back for a discussion about marketing misconceptions, things you should do and things you should not do when it comes to marketing your indie game. So, as always, we'll give everyone a chance to go around the table and introduce themselves. So, I'll start with me and we'll work our way, I guess, clockwise. I am, of course, Josh Placer, the owner of Game Wisdom, where I will talk about just about anything game design and game dev related. There are links in my Discord, Patrons, and all that good stuff. And I am currently going to be writing 2 more books on game design to add to my list, including game design free to play and RPGs. But I'll send it over to Tomo.
Hello, everybody. My name is Tomo Moriwaki. I'm a game designer of 25 years or so. I am a co-founder of a software development studio called Hyperkinetic Studios. We have one game on early access in Steam that's been there for kind of too long called Epic Tavern. That's all about disassembling storytelling, kind of an interesting combination of build your own story versus the story that's already there. And I think my claim to fame is having been the creative director on Spider-Man 2 back in 2004.
Down to Seth.
I am Seth Goldberg. I've been a game designer for not as long as Tomo, about 12 years. Previous to that, some board game designers. Currently, I am working with a company called Strategy Mill on a game called Terminal Conflict, and I also have a project that is all about the discovery of strategy games and reviews and marketing stuff as well.
All right. And to Rob.
Hey, my name is Rob Leach. Been in the industry for 20 years as a producer and designer, depending on what year you're talking about. Right now, I work with the NBA 2K franchise, and formerly I was a co-owner of an indie publishing studio where I made pretty much every marketing mistake I think there is. So hopefully I'll have some stuff to say here.
All right, it is great to have everyone on. And as a reminder to the chat down below, if you have any questions marketing related for our panel, please get them in. I'll be checking chat frequently. As for the time for this roundtable, we will be wrapping up right at 6 p.m. ET, so that will be about an hour and 10 minutes from right now, just to give everyone watching a heads up. But marketing is certainly a topic, and as something that I think I've spoken with everyone on this roundtable about at some point, it is something that's become more and more important, especially over the past, we could say, 5 to 7 years, as the indie space has blown up, as well as what people are looking for when it comes to games. Rob and I we restarted the Indie Inquiry show, where we're reviewing indie game store pages, and of course that is a major point when it comes to marketing. So I guess to get the ball rolling, to go around the table, I want to ask everyone here, what do you think is, I guess, critical when it comes to marketing an indie game? One aspect, one detail that you are very keen on when it comes to your work or what you see. And anyone, feel free to get started.
I'll go first.
I think.
Oh.
Go ahead.
No, go for it, Seth.
The getting yourself out there as more of a person or a team than a product. The authenticity of I can't talk today again. Authenticity of people sells a product next, and people can buy, games from any. They can, there's a lot of games that are very similar. If you look at a 4X, not a lot that differentiates a 4X between itself. But people tend to gravitate towards certain designers. And the reason for that is they feel that that person is more the game than the actor. And I think that really comes out strongly in the indie space. I don't know if it's really true with AAA. I mean, obviously, when I worked at Origin, we had Garriott. So, people loved the Ultima series. It was beloved. So, yeah, in that sense. But, that was pre-internet. Well, not really, but it was kind of the beginning of it. 2000, the beginning of MMOs. But Garriott didn't, he wasn't involved in Usenet. He wasn't, when he made news by producing games. So my original idea doesn't apply for AAA, but it certainly applies for indie publishers. If you look at Old World, we were just talking about the performance of Old World. People follow Soren. Soren is a rock in the 4X and strategy space. He's been doing this for more years than I can recall. His design notes blog has been prevalent since the 2000s. So, he's got a name for himself, and people are more apt to buy, say, his 4X than another team. So making that connection with your audience, very, very important. Just spamming out, screenshots or Reddit articles of a feature set isn't necessarily 100% the right thing to do. It is part of it, but it's not how you would make a complete marketing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and again, I think that's one of the major things we've seen from the independent space is that authenticity, that lack of that transparency, I think, has been a really key factor in terms of getting your name out there. And it's why we see developers like Kitfox, Clay, Chris Park with Ark, and again, we can just sit here and name any major indie success in the past decade, that it really becomes kind of your studio is your brand. That when people hear the name Kitfox or they hear the name Clay, they automatically associate that with the kind of game they want to make or they want to play.
And it's funny, I was going to say on the total flip side, what I think is essential is analyzing who's going to like your game, analyzing the prospective audience, and having a lot of kind of thought and time kind of put into that. And I mean, that also involves things like playing and knowing why people love the kinds of games. I'm going to make a game that the user base of Dwarf Fortress will like. Well, you need to understand Dwarf Fortress, you need to understand those users. I think this actually describes, the two ends of the pipe in a lot of ways, and that both those ends it's hard not to have one, hard not to have both in a lot of ways. But so much of I feel like my job as a game designer is interpreting into the language of the people who are going to be playing, whatever that might actually mean.
I'll actually tie those 2 points together. Seth and Tomo touch on it both, I think, very perfectly. Being a proactive member of a gaming community that actually is, related to the types of product you're making is super important. It's free to do, and it does get your name out there, and you get to just bounce ideas off of people and let people know what you're doing. And when they have a personal relationship with you, it just makes everything so much easier when you are deciding to more proactively market your game when it comes to that point.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and I think all the details there are just very important. Again, it's one of those things marketing in of itself. It's very hard, I think, for a lot of developers to put their finger on, okay, if I do this, my game will succeed, 30% of the way. But if I miss this, now my chance of success is 65%, as we all know, especially from like the strategy and the roguelike roundtables, RNG is such a very nasty thing to discuss. And for, I think, some of these games, and this is a question I want to ask to Tomo and Seth specifically, because Seth obviously covers a lot of strategy games, and strategy games aren't exactly known for having a wide market appeal. That was one of the things I think we discussed in one of the strategy roundtables. And of course, Tomo, you're working on Epic Tavern, which is a game that doesn't really fit the mold of what we consider, the traditional indie game, a platformer, visual novel, roguelike, something like that. So, my question for both of you is, with these genres that aren't really mass market appeal, how does that shift, or how does that adjust your marketing plans, or what you think in terms of marketing for those games?
You want to go first, Seth?
Sure. So I think that's actually a benefit in some ways. When you're marketing to a specific genre, roguelike players are very passionate about roguelikes. So if you connect all the dots in their head, you're going to be able to push to them really well. But on the flip side, if you're not really a roguelike game and you're presenting yourself as a roguelike game, then you're in a mismatch for your target audience. And as Tomo said, target audience is important for sure. But in a genre specific, again, going back to 4X, there aren't a lot of 4Xs on the market. So people are going to tend to pick those up if they're 4X players, regardless of whether it's good or not. I've got a bunch of trash games.
I do that, and I'm happy.
Yeah. So, the long tail is important. The genre specific is important. Terminal Conflict, 2 years later is seeing or a year and a half later is seeing a resurgence in popularity because of the long tail. There are very few Cold War strategy games. And I hate to say it, but the Ukraine situation put this type of stuff in people's head. I was doing it before Ukraine, but we definitely have seen some bumps now, and so it's very genre specific. Obviously, Terminal Conflict is not a very widespread game. Now, when you're dealing with studios, you have fans, or as they call them now, stands of various studios like Kitfox. They've become their own genre, Kitfox games. Just some thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think I agree with everything you said. And what's interesting is, by narrowing, as long as it's a concrete definition of an audience, the narrower the better, because then you can focus on it more. You can spend more time. You're serving a more singular perspective, even if, in the context of like a story-rich game that has management elements, isn't necessarily a singular idea. In some ways, we came to that combination of features through some amount of Steam Spy analysis and this sort of just this weird feeling that we're buying up these games that are like, $9.99 to $29.99, and they often have novel feature combinations, and there's often a fantasy theme, and story is becoming more and more important, and there's often management features. Like, it's a lot of ways, it seems really different or doesn't fit the mold, but it was kind of built from a mold that was built off of a vibe out of the fact that a bunch of us that are at Hyperkinetic are just sort of avid Steam indie game players, and that it wasn't going to be an action game. And so that cut away a lot of things like the platformery stuff and that kind of stuff. I also feel like some amount of novelty, and I think this feeds directly into what Seth was talking about with the Cold War. It's good not to have competition. It's good to stake your ground in some rare territory, knowing that other people aren't going to be interested necessarily in kind of building over your ground, and then you can really secure that base. And there's nothing stopping you from growing from that position. But an indie strategy to find sort of untread ground and stake it for themselves and become the master of that space is, I think, very valid, especially from an indie standpoint.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think for both of your points, I think that's a really good, misconception to point out for our developers watching. That, and this was something I was talking about in my post I wrote about, the universal chase for fun, or the unattainable chase. That there is this idea that there is that perfect game. That one game that you will unite everybody, that there will be no problems, that, it will be the, 100 out of 10 score and the perfect game of the year. And that's not how it works. And the games that oftentimes succeed, as both of you guys have pointed out, they have a very specific focus. They have who their audience is, whether it is a visual novel or a roguelike or an FPS. And then when we talk about approachability and accessibility, that comes at the design stage, not at the marketing stage. Because if you try to build a game that appeals to literally everyone, there's no real focus. And I've played games where it feels like they're just, trying to grasp at any original concept. We did a chat about Duke Nukem Forever last week, and a big point about that was that the developers just kept chasing what was the hot new trend. They never really nailed down what is our intended core gameplay loop and who is that intended audience was going to be. And if you can't answer that question as quickly as possible, you're never going to have that solid footing. And I want to bring Rob into the equation because I have a question for you as well. But one last point, that you can have a very specific gameplay loop, but you need to be able to answer that question as to what is this market going to respond to it. And if you can't do that, then you're just not really starting off from a good foundation to build your entire game on. But here's my question for you, Rob, because you've had experience much like with Tomo, and I believe Seth as well, as having both AAA and as well as the independent kind of viewpoint. And obviously you're working at 2K right now, so you've had a chance to see things from the AAA machine. So my question for you is, as somebody who's kind of have dabbled in both areas, what do you think, or is there an aspect of AAA development that they can get away with something that independent developers or small developers just cannot? This is something that if AAA does, you should not do this.
One thing that sticks out to me is paid marketing. One, a bigger developer, a AAA, any major company is going to be able to outspend any indie company. And this is on all platforms like Google Ads, Facebook, Twitter. So every time you're putting money into those areas, you're actually just going to get the bottom of the barrel, worst times, worst users to focus on, unless you're very keen on targeting and that kind of thing. But yeah, you're never going to get those ideal spots. Anytime there's any crossover in the user base, which, indies have a very dedicated user base, but also that user base is probably not going to get their game, the games they want to buy off of ads. They're probably going to go through community forums and such. So yeah, probably don't compete there. You're gonna lose that battle. They've got all the money. They've got all the research. They've got their market handled. So you got to do the more less straightforward, a little more roundabout, but a little more personal ways of approaching it, as mentioned previously.
Guerrilla marketing. There's a lot to be said for it. It worked in the independent film industry. Why wouldn't it work in games? At EA, they spent millions and millions of dollars on, ad placement, all kinds of, other traditional marketing. There might have been billboards in California, but there certainly were for other uh, from the EA stable. But I think even an indie game paying for marketing is kind of questionable. Especially if it's influencer marketing. There's a ton of influencers who are just as good or willing to do it for free. Paradox can spend money for influencer marketing. Most indies don't need to. If their game is good, it's going to get played, and people are going to see that. I mean, look at some of these indie successes. You've got the vampire one right now, Vampire Survivors. It's a great game. It's pure dopamine, and it's getting played, and people see that game and go, "Wow, it's $3. It looks fun. I'm going to pick it up." Next thing you know, it's
still going?
1,000 units. What?
Is it still going strong?
Yeah.
Nice.
And it's an early access. Eggland, which is a roguelike based on Peggle combat. PEGLIN.
Oh yeah.
They sold 100,000 units in a week out of nowhere. I mean, it's a really unique game concept, but it's an indie darling. It's one of those freak successes. I'm not saying it's a bad game. I love it. I was certainly one of the ones pushing it. And the team is just amazing. But it was one of those games that got good indie placement. And they didn't need to spend for marketing. As a matter of fact, I think they could. I don't think they had that type of budget.
Mm-hmm. That actually takes me to a question that I want to ask the table about the indie breakouts, because this is, I think, another major misconception. I think to build what Seth was just talking about in terms of like influencers, that there's people who think that, again, like we've used this before, that if Markiplier or PewDiePie plays my game, that's the path to gold, riches, and success. But as we've seen, there are a lot of the games that kind of blow up out of nowhere, your Disco Elysiums, Vampire Survivors, V Rising, Peglin, that some of these games, they just seem to just magically appear one day. That, it feels like, excuse me. Oh, there you go. It just feels like some days that, day one, the game doesn't exist. Day two, it just magically is, successful. And I think for a lot of indie developers, they have a hard time, I think, grasping, why did this game blow up and my game didn't? Why is this game sitting at 100, 200, 300,000 sales, week one? I'm not even breaking 100. So I want to kind of ask the table here, like when you look at a game like Peglin or Vampire Survivors, what kind of like takeaways, or do you have any takeaways in terms of how did this game, did it just scratch off the lucky lottery number, or was there something else going on that led to its success?
I would say that actually comes to another marketing misconception. There is always this balance between kind of a lucky, the luck of getting successful, and the purposeful skill and targeting of marketing. And certainly you got to lean on the skillful part. This part you can control in terms of targeting any type of influencer who might like specialize in your genre, or have a forum that you're a part of that can actually get the word out really well. But then there is that lucky part where maybe a Markiplier does stumble, like, he loves playing those little horror games, those like PS1 style horror games. And if you get picked up by him, suddenly you get a pretty big audience of hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people, depending on the day. But, I know there's the misconception is that it's either one of those that's just going to do it, and luck is a major part. It is. It's a major part of being super successful. But if you work hard, if you target, if you use your platform and your the various communities you're a part of, and you do some study in terms of what you want your game to be, that's going to go a long ways. It might not make you stinking rich, but you build up that community over time. Your first game might not sell 1 million copies, but your fifth or sixth or 20th may. So you just got to keep going the hard road. It's difficult, but it's possible.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think something else that has to be kept in mind is that, the quality of the game, the quality of that experience is going to influence sort of the endurance of the product. Like we take Vampire Survivors, for example. One thing that's great about it is that it's short session. It's usually pretty sharp and intense. It always ends in chaos. And I remember someone in my work Discord channel posting a GIF of the whole screen covered with projectiles. And I'm like, oh, that reminds me of Bangayo. I bought it. And then I'm playing it. And then it's fun and it's sticky. And not only is it fun and it's sticky, but I play it for like a couple of hours, then I forget about it for a week, and then there's an update with new weapons. And then I play it again, right? And then it just hits just frequently enough that I did that 3 weeks in a row. Now I have a habit. And that habit means all my friends watching me play go like, what the hell is Tomo playing for the last 4 weeks? I'll give it a shot. Oh, it's only $3. Sure, I'm in. And you see that thing spread like wildfire. Now, not everybody builds their games with that kind of a sort of a viral human strategy in mind. And I mean, certainly a game like Epic Tavern wasn't built with that in mind. It was really kind of like a academic experiment in trying to make something people would find interesting while also kind of making ourselves a really difficult problem. Like our approach was totally opposite. We're going to make a game that people can spend hundreds of hours playing, and once we get out of early access, we'll understand how to talk about it better, and then we'll broadcast that message. It's a bit of a long play, but it kind of speaks to what Robert's talking about in that you really need to master the promise, and your marketing can only be as good as the promise. And so step one, I mean, we get this. If you don't understand the product you're marketing, well, there's no point in having much more conversation about it. But then once you do, now it starts getting complicated, because how good is the game? Who is it meant for? How do you reach them? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
I think the influencer marketing is just a tool in your toolbox. You don't necessarily need it, but it's certainly one you can use. I think you need a lot of tools to be successful. And yes, luck is one of them. But you can mitigate the luck factor to a certain degree. I've seen things go horribly wrong. Fall Guys just pulled off the Steam store and is going free to play, and I don't even know where you can buy it, I guess from them, because it wound up failing. But it had a tremendous incline at the very, very beginning because of influencer marketing. On the flip side of that, you've got Among Us, which originally failed and then got picked up by some darling streamers and exploded. So you don't want to be in a situation where you're totally dependent by a flip of the coin. You want to use as many tools as possible. And I think Tomo hit something really important. It's that short play set. I think a lot of us gamers are aging. And I don't have time to sit down for a 12-hour game. I couldn't imagine playing classic Warcraft, World of Warcraft. Couldn't even imagine playing an MMO at this time. I don't have the attention span for it. I constantly find myself choosing smaller games. And that's a little bit weird because I'm a war gamer. War gamers are not quick out. I can't wait till me and Tomo actually play one. It'll probably take 97 weeks for a normal game. We won't remember what the heck we're doing week to week. But, so you've got that smaller games, it's quick hit dopamine. These are all the tools that you can use to influence how the game is going to be perceived after. And that long tail, which in this case isn't that long when you're looking at the first month of sales, But that short tail, that viral marketing that'll hit, is always going to be critical to the success. Other than when you look out, like Piglin did, like Among Us did. I think another thing is building in viral sharing abilities, viral pieces. Like Tomo said, the screenshots were very influential in looking at the game for Vampire Survivors. You were like, wow, this is really cool. Mini Metro, the second one, they have a feature in it where you can take a picture and it does an animated GIF of the city and the cars moving around. It's really good. You know, people don't like the developer because of his political beliefs, but Domina, the Gladiator game, it exports GIFs of these 10-second fights that are really bloody and really intense. But it's, you see that and you go, okay, I want to get that game. These are all marketing tools that you can use. Granted, they're not pre-sales, but nonetheless, they're still tools that you have to consider.
Mm-hmm. And to kind of, I think, build off of both Seth and Tomo, especially Seth, what you were saying about kind of the short engagement. I think one of the things that we've seen, and this is something again that I've talked about many times, is just how important that first experience of your game is. That if somebody loads up your game and within like 2 minutes, like, yes, I want to keep playing this game, you definitely have something. But again, when we look at a lot of strategy games, a lot more complicated titles, it's you load up that game, maybe in 30 hours you'll have a rough idea as to whether or not you have an idea as to how this game is supposed to play. And it's very hard, I think, to market these kinds of games that way when you have this situation. And it's again why I think we've seen so many discussions about onboarding and approachability. That you need to give players that kind of, I guess, like that marketing GIF, or that, that one that you can show to somebody who has never heard of this game and go, look at this. Like we saw this with the Darkest Dungeon, where you can just look at one of the GIFs of someone like swinging a sword or hearing Wayne June, wax Lovecraftian. That,
oh yeah,
it's like you can give someone that, I guess, like that wow moment that you can then, market the heck out of to every single person you know.
That was one of the most brilliant reward campaigns. Having him, Wayne Jude, June, is it June or Jude?
June, I think.
Having him speak whatever you wanted. I know a lot of streamers who like took up on that, and I would love to have my answering machine done as that. I didn't jump in on that, but that makes me think though, because Darkest Dungeon 2 is having a lot of problems with its market.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're successful the first time around, you've built up the expectation. And if you fail to meet the expectations of your target audience, you've got to revolt on it.
Yep.
It's as bad as Pitchfork.
Dude, Sunless Seas. Oh, that hurt me to see that happen.
And then
Sunless Sea rolls in like 500 to 700K, and then Sunless Skies just goes nowhere right out the gates. It's still around and it's been making its way, but that must have been an unpleasant launch when you're like so successful.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a big Alexis Kennedy fan, and I've been following him for a while, and he didn't write Skies, and I think that was the problem. He left the studio.
Well, a lot of people didn't even read any of it, though, right?
Yeah.
Trine is another example, when they went from Trine 2 to 3, I think, and they completely changed the entire engine. I think this is, again, another aspect. This could easily fit its own topic, but the idea of, again, sustaining and growing, and how do you manage that? Because, like we've all said, that you can have that amazing first game, But then if you go in a completely different direction for game number 2, you can't guarantee that all those people, or even the majority of your fan base, are going to come along for that ride. Now, another question I wanted to bring up, and this kind of goes back to Vampire Survivors. Or actually, before we get to that, I actually want to bring up another point. Regarding the marketability of a game, I think this is something that Tomo touched on earlier. I think with regards to either Tomo said it regarding the kind of transparency or giving that opinion or that idea that you are a trustworthy person when you're making your game. One of the things I've been hearing from the indie horror space has been a lot of developers trying to chase not so much the gameplay of Five Nights at Freddy's, but the marketability of Five Nights at Freddy's. And we're seeing a lot of YouTubers who cover indie horror games kind of having a mini revolt or refusal to play some of these games, where you see them. The game is not so much about the game, but it's about trying to market all the toys and all the shirts and all the characters. This was something that I've seen people complain about with, what was it? Bendy and the Ink Machine, and the recent Poppy's Playtime. That they're already, selling, I think, NFTs and, character plushes, and the game isn't even out yet. And I feel like this is another issue that I wanted to bring up for the table, is that I think some developers are trying to put the cart before the horse. That they're trying to have that blow-up success without having the game to back it up. And I want to just get everyone's thoughts on that.
Well, I mean, my opinion is it depends, right? Is it inherently wrong to get a bunch of attention and maybe even get a bunch of money before you've actually done anything? I mean, obviously that sounds like kind of a nice thing to pull off, right? Now, that said, you are definitely not going to be allowed to do it again if you totally flub after that. I think it's sort of like some of the old problems with Kickstarter and projects not panning out. It's the kind of thing where audiences that are really excited, and this is actually kind of extra sad in that you've got them so excited and then you fail afterward, or let's say, you'll, even if you're not intending to screw them over, you'll be seen as a bit of a shyster there. And so I never assumed that anyone's trying to do that, because in my experience, every single person I've talked to who's been called a cheater, turns out they were just trying and they failed, just like the rest of us.
Yeah. Someone said earlier today, it's amazing how things come together sometimes, that, what is it? What's the Chris Crawford game?
Chris Crawford?
Not Chris Crawford. Now I'm forgetting his name.
Chris Park?
Starts with his name.
Chris Roberts.
Chris Roberts. So that was the first NFT in gaming. All the ships and such. And wow, that's actually true. And, he sold these ships as rewards, for upwards of thousands of dollars. They haven't been built yet. They haven't been made yet. They don't exist. And the ones that do, you've got them in a hangar, and you could walk around them, and some of them you could take out and fly around. Some of them you can't. And it's cool, and they're certainly a little more functional than an NFT, but they're essentially the same. And more power to him, right? Because who am I to, and Tomo taught me, who am I to say that you can't spend your money like you want? They knew what they were getting into. Maybe they enjoy that. I used to think that type of behavior was bad, and Tomo's right. So if you can get that marketing for those plushies, for those things, what's wrong with that? I mean, Marvel does it, and people don't boycott Marvel. Or the MCU, sorry, whatever. I guess that's Disney now. They're gonna put out whatever they can before the movie comes out, because that's just how it is. I remember when my stepdaughter used to play, not Habio, but another one where you got these plushies at the store and you scanned in the card, and then you got them in this MMO like game. They were little animals and stuff. Right. Now, your average indie developer is not going to be able to pull that off. I keep telling some companies to come out with plushies for their stuff. But, they don't have the funds to do that.
Yeah, I really like that point of, well, why not? It's not all that bad. In practice, in theory, it's going to be difficult, like you say, for indie developers to do that, lower end especially. And I think, Tomo, you brought up the Kickstarter. That I feel like is the 10-year-old version of this exact thing. You're basically marketing your game before it's ever even really made. And there's all kinds of issues that come up there. Like you say, you have the best intentions. Either the Kickstarter blows up and you can't meet the expectations, or the Kickstarter fails and you still want to get a game out. And there's issues with that aspect of things as well. But yeah, it's another tool in the tool belt. Just to borrow Seth's phrase there, it's just one of many things you should try. If you got a T-shirt, at the very least, you can wear it outside, and maybe you get a couple questions about it. I feel like that's the low hanging fruit right there. It's like if you do go to like a game conference, wear a T-shirt. That's probably the best way. Don't get a booth necessarily. I mean, that mistake has been made by indie developers trying to push their game. It's expensive. It's not necessarily worth it. But yeah, there's all kinds of little things you can do that go towards that end. If you're really savvy, if you can come up with a cool character that catches on, more power to you. Absolutely.
Epic Tavern has the comic book. There's certainly a marketing end to that.
Yep. Sea of Heroes they had a comic book too. Among Us has the plushies and the GIFs and all the wacky stuff of Fall Guys as well. So I mean, yeah, I think I agree with you guys that if you have the option, if you have the ability, or you have the marketability around these characters, there's nothing wrong with that. But again, as we've said, it's all about like that public perception and how you pitch this to people. That like with something like with Five Nights at Freddy's, like the game was done, like it was already out, and then the marketing machine just went 10 billion fold into it. And I think again, it's that perception of if your game isn't even done yet, is it okay to start marketing these characters? I think again, it really depends on what you have planned and how this all works.
Well, if you fail to deliver on the game, you're going to get run out of town.
Yeah.
If you market, stuff ahead of time. We've seen that happen in Kickstarters. We've seen that happen even with, I think the game was a DS9, DF9, where they couldn't deliver. But yet they took a lot of money in. You're going to get run out of time and ruin your reputation. Many studios have gone that way. I think, unfortunately, Goddess did that for Molyneux. No one's going to trust Molyneux anymore. I mean, he fell from grace. So you have to be careful with that. And that's one of the reasons why AAA has a leg up.
Because it's anonymized to some extent.
Well, and they can throw money at it till it works.
Yep.
Yeah, there is that. I mean, because us indies, you make a small mistake and you're like, wow, look, on the other side of that valley, we just can't get there. Not a good feeling.
Yeah. Also, as a bit of a time check, it is 5:31 ET, so we'll be wrapping things up in the next 29 minutes. So for chat, if you do have any questions for the roundtable, please get them in at 5:45, so in about 13 minutes, that will be officially last call for questions. But I have two very big marketing misconception points I want to bring up to the table and see what everyone thinks. So the first one, going back to Vampire Survivors, Five Nights, V Rising, these lightning in a bottle moments, these big games that just seem to explode out of nowhere. that we've seen developers who, the second they see a major game or they hear about someone doing really well, they will immediately, if not sooner, try to make a game similar to it. Right now, of course, again, I've played about 5 different Vampire Survivor likes in the last 2 months, and Vampire Survivors isn't even out yet. Among Us, very much the same thing. For people watching, I'm sure you haven't heard of a deck building roguelike in the past 4 years. Since that little game Slay the Spire, no one ever heard of that one. And the point that I want to bring up about this misconception I feel a lot of developers tend to struggle with is the difference between a game succeeding and a market succeeding. And what I mean by that is the market, is there a market for deck building roguelikes? Just as is there a market for Vampire Survivor likes? Or is it just that one game that's going to do well? Because from what I've seen, it never seems like these games that create a new subgenre actually create a new market. Because a lot of the deck building roguelikes that I've played and loved, not one has overtaken Slay the Spire. Just like not one Vampire Survivor like has taken, Vampire Survivors.
I feel like with any genre. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I feel like with any subgenre exploding like lightning in a bottle thing, there's always going to breed copycats. And this goes like film has spawned this infinite times as well. But the thing that's great about it, and like you say, you created some subgenre and you create kind of a market there. I think that's definitely a thing. But as long as you take that and expand upon it in your own way, you do see deck building games that are just fantastically creative. And I can't remember the name of the one that's fairly recent where you are. There's a story being told. You're in a room. It's kind of like get out of the room kind of thing. I wish I could remember.
Stanley Parable.
No, that's not a deck building game, but I love the Stanley Parable. Oh my god!
Deck building Inscription.
Yes, that's the one. But yeah, that one took it to the umpteenth level, and then you get the Five Nights at Freddy's thing. They kind of built upon themselves in that regard. I mean, what are we on? Like 37? The 37th iteration of Five Nights at Freddy's? I mean, obviously not, but it's insane, and there are some great things that come from that, but. Yeah, there's misery that comes out of it as well, and those are the kinds of developers that you're just. I know you want to make a good game. I know you're a fan of this, but you also look like you're just like money grabbing, being an opportunist, and I don't like opportunism as a marketing tool, as it were.
Yeah, well, I think that there's to speak. First of all, I just agree with what Robert says, so I don't need to add anything to that. But what you were talking about in terms of true genre success versus product success, right? I think that Heroes Hour is a great example of market success, right? It's like, hey, this is a game that serves this type of games audience perfectly well. Here you go, enjoy. And and in some ways, we're going to do practically nothing to add to the genre. Rather, we're going to make it easy to play. We're going to add a good amount of variety. We're going to make it smooth. And it'll be, inexpensive, maybe an efficient expression from a visual fidelity standpoint, but nice. And shit, I put too much time into Heroes Hour. On the flip side, super weird games that have no analogy, they exist. People like them. They remember them. There are things about them that might be reminiscent of other games, and that's really important to kind of connect us to that game, sort of like a network theory of where it exists in the marketplace. But then other people, like some of the developers, think about it and they're like, yeah, I'm definitely not going to copy that because I don't even understand it in the least. And it's neat where those two types and all the products in between that range sort of how they have to exist. In fact, there's probably an entire conversation to actually talk about how your marketing requirements shift as you march up and down that kind of number line.
Oh, certainly, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Songs of Conquest that just came out that I tried last week is only another really good example of Heroes Hour in that.
Sorry,
that's good. That it's not doing anything above and beyond for the genre, but it's just packaging it in a way that's just really great and affordable to play.
Yeah, no, it's Songs of Conquest is great. You know, I wasn't a big Slay the Spire fan. I know, throw rocks. I think there are much better deck builders out there. And you see the same thing in board game design, where some engine building game takes off and explodes, and then all of a sudden 30 different engine building games come out, and really the only difference is the theming. You know, one's about farming, one's about factories, one's about, you know, whatever. And you also seen that same thing I was talking about with people following the developer. Hugh Rosenberg is certainly a name that people follow for his engine builders. And, you know, he's got some very unique design things. That's one of the things I really, really enjoy when I pick up a game, is unique design. When you combine Peggle with a roguelike, I'm all for it. I mean, come on. How could you not want to play that? You have 3 action points, 5 cards, and a couple of relics. And you're killing this and that and this and that. The only thing different is theming. And some of them are good. And the ones that are good take the model and expand. And it's important in their marketing that they get that out. Because everything's a Slay the Spire at this point, including Metro Radio.
Yeah, and we could certainly spend like the next 3 hours talking about like Lobby of Ruin inscription. We could just like turn this a deck building cast. I know Tomo will have to leave though, but we can just transition into that easy.
Yeah, you could actually just go with the deck builders as an example of board games. I mean, Dominion and then this, everybody's doing deck builders after that.
Right. Dominions was the first one.
Oh yeah.
Do you guys remember a game called Swords and Poker?
No.
Which one?
Swords and Poker.
Sounds great.
I think it's a good. It's very similar in some of its underlying structure. I mean, in its sort of conceptual structure to something like Puzzle Quest. But I highly recommend looking it up. It's a 5x5 card matrix that any of the axes that create like poker hands for effect, but then the output of your success results in doing damage to monsters. And it's these weird mashups. They have over time, as a whole, become their own genre, even though each of those games are super different from each other.
I think building your own genre though can work, but look at what happened with auto battlers. For a while, that was the big rage. Your auto battlers, your auto chess.
Oh yes.
And that was huge for a while, and then it fell off. I mean, Teamfight Tactics still is alive, and the Dota Auto Chess is still alive, but nowhere.
We just need some more titles. We need some new, a little bit of new life needs to be, pushed into that space. And I think because the fundamental of the auto battler, I think, is really strong. There's a lot of people that are so like, oh, yeah, all that clicking and all that mathing. It's like,
Godhood did a really good job with it. It's Abby games. I really liked it. It didn't do very well, but it's basically an incremental auto battle.
Nice, got him.
Yeah, and I think
go ahead.
I was going to say, I think that's another really good point about how marketing perception can really help or hurt a game. Because when they were pitching this game on Kickstarter, and I remember it, they were saying, this is the next great God game. This is our redesigned take on a God game. And then when it came out, it was more focused on that auto battler design. And a lot of people were just like, the record scratch moment. Like, wait, this is not what you were saying. What happened?
Whereas if the game comes out this August and with all the same words, suddenly everyone's like, oh, yeah.
Yeah, that is not a God game whatsoever. I mean, you build a God and you have certain tenants, but those are really just percentage models.
But that is something worth talking about. That you think that in the imagination of the audience, they'll understand this message, so you use it instead of your truth. And that, in some cases, that can work because for all products, right, the hook to get them to come differs from the reason why they stay. But people don't like feeling like they were tricked.
Oh yes.
Yes, sir.
Mm-hmm. And we are about like 20 minutes out, give or take. I have one final question, and then we have time. I'll throw it to you guys if you have any other points. But this actually goes with Orocast's comment about what would you tell an aspiring dev for his first game regarding marketing. And there's one misconception that I always think about whenever we have these discussions, and that is the marketing is evil crowd. That we see this from a lot of younger developers, a lot of people who focus more on the art side, who will, say, how dare you try and talk about your game on Twitter or post about it on Reddit or Facebook. You're fleecing people. You're trying to get people to buy your game. The horror of asking people to buy your game. And I feel like one of the biggest misconceptions when it comes to marketing, and this is something I think for a really good point for new developers, is that marketing is not evil. That it is not this, malicious tool that you're using to try and fleece people out of their money. There are developers who have done that, unfortunately. We can certainly see that from a lot of these shadier developers, ones who show up, when, Dreamquisition roasts them and stuff like that. But for the most part, marketing is not this evil tool. And I just want to give everyone a chance to kind of expand on that in terms of the role marketing has in terms of game dev.
Getting the word out about your game is critical. Steam is horrible for discovery. You're going to get buried in 90,000 games if you don't get your word out. And we've seen good games die because they didn't get the word out.
I have something sort of harsh to say, actually. First of all, you have to market your game. You have to figure out who it's going to go to. You got to convince them to buy it, right? I mean, that's kind of there's not a whole lot of choice there. That said, you can't lean away from that. I think of it this way: if you can't quickly explain your game or your product in a way that sounds interesting, then why do you think that you know what you're making? Why do you think that you're going to feel passionate about this thing, but somehow you're not going to practice saying it succinctly? Somehow you're not going to practice wrapping that succinct message about your product into a form that is easily absorbed and paid attention to by the people you're expecting to play the game, right? Leaning away from that, it's like saying, I don't like people. And that's obviously not what we're about, right? Why are we making the game in the first place?
For me, a lot of it kind of comes down to do you want to develop a game or be a game developer? A lot of times you get an idea and you want to be very passionate about it, and that's where a lot of the marketing is evil folks, I think, come from, is that, well, I have this passion project, and that kind of takes the passion away. Well, if you're looking to be a successful game developer, like long term, you got to build towards that success. And that means reaching out. That means getting copies in hands, or else no one's ever going to discover your next game, the game after. So it's just a constant, and also you're learning how to develop. Your first game's probably not going to be that fantastic, in terms of your vision. And you'll meet that vision as you go further along. But even if it hits every note, even if it's you've hit your vision 100%, no one's going to play it unless you tell them. You get the word out. Like Seth says, Steam is terrible for discovery, and yet it's that necessary evil. Where else are you going to sell it? It's just cheap to go on, and everyone's there. So you got to embrace it at some level. Do what you can, figure it out. Like if you hate the concept of marketing, well, find what works for you and try and just use that as your entry level marketing step. But you got to do something. You got to get it out somehow, or you're asking for failure, unfortunately.
Reach out to Seth.
There you go.
That will work. I've built up a community on discoverability. So one thing I wanted to add is when I built Pirates of Somalia, which is the Facebook game I did back in 2010 that was basically a clone of Mafia Wars, but we jumped the technology and put actual game design into Mafia Wars. So I had to learn how to market because really, I was the only one who knew the complete vision of the project before it was built. You know, we were a ragtag crew. Most of the people didn't know game design, had no experience in the industry. And it was a necessary thing to sit down and learn how to market. Not necessarily a game, but in general, how to market. And getting the word out is absolutely critical to almost any key success indicator you have for the release of the game. Other than, okay, I want to build a game and put it on itch. Okay, that's great, but then no one plays it. So if you want to sell 100 copies, you still have to get 100 people interested.
It's probably worth noting, though, if you can get a great deal to get on a platform with a small number of games, like imagine if you got like a Epic Games Store opportunity, like especially the further back in time you go, because now there's kind of a lot of games on Epic Games Store. That's like, from a marketing standpoint, that's marketing through relationship with the store, right? And so it's kind of like if you're making an app and Apple loves you, that's a real good position to be in. In some cases, for especially iOS App Store, that can have a much bigger impact than the quality of the game you have. Granted, Apple tends not to like you if it's in low quality, but still.
Yeah, that's why Spark applications at the very beginning made millions of dollars.
When Switch first opened up their doors to indie developers, and all those indie games rushed onto Switch, being like the only game in town at the time. You know, we had like a 3 to 6 month gold rush period for indie games, and unfortunately that has, completely closed up.
That kind of goes to, well, if you don't want to do marketing, you're letting someone else do the marketing for you. So it's just an indirect form of marketing. Like, Steam or Apple, they want to make money off of it, so they're just going to spend their gobs of money to do the same thing you've been wanting to avoid the whole time. So it's, pick your poison, I guess.
Mm-hmm. And throughout Thara's Moon, hopefully I didn't butcher that too badly, I think had another really interesting point. And this is something I hear from a lot of indie developers. Couldn't you argue that the time that was spent marketing could be spent making the game better, if a small team, solo dev, and word of mouth is powerful for a good game? And I think Tomo answered my thoughts too at the same time, but it is that challenge of there has to be a balance. That and I think this goes back to Rob's point about being a game developer and just wanting to make games. That if you want to succeed in this space, it's not a either or. That you need to be thinking about both at the same time. My friend Z from Serenity Forge, I always bring up the quote he told me, that there is as much art in the business as there is business in the art. That if you want to succeed, the business, boring stuff isn't something that you just put aside, or you just close your eyes and hope that it all gets done magically. It's something that you need to be actively thinking about. And I think it's, again, why we see some of these games that tend to blow up, is that they do figure out, how to capture what does the market want at that given time. And that, again, like as we've said before, that game dev is not magic. That there is hard foundational stuff that goes into this stuff that you may never realize if you're not actually the one building the game. And again, I can rant and ramble, but I know we are coming up on 9 minutes, so I'm going to throw it to you guys. Do you have any final thoughts, passing comments, anything you want to talk about in terms of marketing, or get off your chest before we wrap things up?
I think for me, it's just sort of reinforcing this idea that the essence of your marketing is your concept of what is the essential promise of your product. And so therefore it has to be something that like the back of your hand. That it's just an essential part of product making is knowing what the product is. In fact, if you can't explain to me what your game, if you can't explain to me what the game is and have sort of a passionate description of why I'd be interested in it, I don't believe I don't believe that you're making a good game, because you're not going in any particular direction. Maybe you have hopes and dreams about certain features. You have moments that you find exciting, but that doesn't make a game necessarily.
We'll say that's another thing, going back to what a AAA company can get away with that an indie can't really, and that is, when you make your game perfect, and not all AAA companies can do this. It's very selective. You can delay your game to make something better. You can delay your game for a new feature, or because it doesn't meet the designer's standards. And you can just say, well, we're going to wait another year before we release it. An indie game can't really do that. If you set a date and you miss it over and over again, one of the developers I worked with did this. You just lost all credibility. Your audience is gone. They're on to the next thing. So, make sure that when you do have a goal in mind, you hit that goal. You have to cut features. But, doing that too often, putting the overall perceived quality before the launch, it's going to hurt you long term in terms of sales regardless.
Yeah. We started with talking about target audience. And I think figuring out your target audience is definitely a critical step. Because if you miss your target audience, you get a huge amount of returns. You're going to get bad vibes. Mm-hmm. Also, marketing doesn't stop when the product ships. Unless you're one of those flash in the lightning in a bottle successes, and you drive off in your Lamborghini down to Cabo, like the guys from Banish did, and never produce a game again, you're going to need your reputation, the success, the further sales. Sales don't stop after the first week. I know that first week is important and critical, but they don't stop. Mm-hmm. You need to keep marketing throughout the product cycle, which is usually a long tail cycle.
Yep.
It's your relationship with your audience. Like, they're the people you care about. You spend energy on them forever. I mean, it seems like sometimes I feel like the anti-marketing point of view is just an outside view that didn't fully think through the reality of what's going on.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and again, you have to find that audience. You need to figure out, who am I able to tap into to get excited about my game? Because if you can get somebody excited about it who can then tell their friends about it, that's how we start to see this widespread appeal. And this is something that I said in that article, that people, games like Celeste, Disco Elysium, and so on, or Stardew Valley, they weren't designed to be mass market successes. They wanted to make those specific games, and then the audience found it, and then the audience began to shout the praises from those developers. And you have to, again, if you cannot figure out what your audience is, you can still succeed. Again, as we've said, there are no hard rules when it comes to this kind of stuff. But it's always about mitigating risks. It's about giving your game the best possible chance to succeed. That was mentioned Cruelty Squad. Like, that's another, out of nowhere, how the heck did people hear about this game kind of moment. But you cannot rely on dumb luck if you want to actually have a studio succeed. And let's see. And I think
Things
people.
Are broken.
What was that?
Things are broken.
Yeah, I know. I think we lost Rob again. All the names are messed up. But we are about 4 minutes out, so I think let us wrap things. So it'll probably take about 3 minutes to go through all of our end of video speeches. And again, for people just tuning in, yes, all the windows, we gotta miss a line here, but that's all right. I'm not sure what order we'll do in this. I'm all the windows mess up, but I guess I'll I'll do my thing. So again, I'm Josh Placer. Again, I'm in the wrong window at the moment. But if you want to follow me, again, do liking, subscribing, commenting. Discord, Patreon, Twitter are over there. And if you have suggestions for a future Game Dev Roundtable topic, let us know. Check out my books, sites, all that great stuff. And I guess I'll throw it up to the other Josh/Seth.
I am not Josh. I'm Seth, which you can find all my links down below. They're usually posted there. Come on over to my Discord, follow me on Twitter. You can come to my website, The Strategy Informer, if you want. We're doing a lot of updates on it in the next couple of days with all kinds of articles. If you're interested in talking game design, or if you're interested in getting me to consult for you, get a hold of me.
All right. And to Seth, Tomo. Oh, you're muted right now, Tomo.
Like I said, Tomo Moriwaki. Epic Tavern is the game that we're working on at Hyperkinetic Studios. It is still in early access, and we stream development a couple times a week and have a dev chat sessions at our Discord channel. And you can find our Discord channel at discord.gg/Epic Tavern, where we like discussing all things Epic Tavern, storytelling, game design, game industry related.
All right. And I forgot to mention this, but if you are a developer also who's working on a game you're looking for someone to cover, I am always looking for indie games, be them traditional ones or completely out there ones. Just feel free to reach out to me as well. And again, like Seth said, all the links to everything is down in the description. And we try to get together at least once a month to do these chats. So be sure to tune in for that, and check out the rest of the content here on the channel. But we are going to say goodbye, and hopefully we'll get our windows realigned for next time. Rob does not have any contacts or social media yet. He is planning on doing streaming at some point, and that will be updated down below when that happens. So, gentlemen, it was a pleasure hanging out with you this evening.
Thanks for having me, Josh. As always, it was a lot of fun. And until next time.
It was great, guys. Thanks for the chat, for showing up and giving me support and some great questions and statements.
Yep. So everyone, have a great rest of your night, and come back for daily discussions on game design here and on game wisdom, where some of the art and science of games. And until next time, take care.